What's going on, everybody? It's FREEDO here for your Overwatch, and today we're tackling what I would call the most difficult conversation of Overwatch, a type of topic that will be debated amongst players for years to come even. And with that being the case, there is never really a perfect answer to target prioritization, because every game is different depending on the players you're playing against. But even worse, the meta has been changing from month to month, it seems. So even if I could come up with some hard, fast rules that we can follow for Season 5, another big patch could come in and completely throw a wrench in the works. But even though there probably could be some disagreement on what is the best things to target when, in the multitude of complex situations that you come into in Overwatch, at the very least in today's video, we're going to attempt to create a template, a sort of equation that you can plug in situations into to try to figure out, in the given game situations you're in, what's the most important thing to worry about. In previous videos, I've described the key to target prioritization as isolating threats. Even more specifically, it could be described as isolating the win condition, which is an even more complex concept, as well as, of course, avoiding a loss condition. Now, the truth is, the answers to these questions are going to change fluidly depending on the team comp you're running, the enemy's running, and your objective at a given time, which changes depending on what area of the map you're fighting on, what type of map you're on, and what the state of the score is. I'll attempt to try to cover all those bases, but instead, let's isolate everything down and simplify it for now into an archetypical example that I see happen in matchmaking all the time, and that is when a team has the advantage going into the fight, but somehow still loses the fight. Now you go into a situation, you have a pick. This is where sometimes in matchmaking, you see a lot of teams lose sight of what the loss condition of the fight is. That, of course, is going to be barreling on into the fight, ignoring the enemy team's biggest threats, assuming that because you just have man advantage, you should win the fight for free. No, having an advantage into a fight is just that. It means you are likely to win the fight, but that doesn't mean you can't lose it. Targeting the wrong things can get your entire team killed, even in a situation where you assume you should have won. Now, for a major part of this video, we're going to be taking it from the perspective of Winston, who pro analysts are saying is the most important character of the current pro meta. And I'd have to agree, in the mobility meta, there's no greater jack-of-all-trades tank like Winston who can deal with all sorts of threats, but it's also possible to not play Winston right, of course. If you lose sight of who you should be fighting as Winston, you can very quickly lose the fight for your team. So that makes him a good example for very clear decision-making of target prioritization, but also not the most difficult one, meaning that I feel pretty safe in my suggestions of who Winston should be targeting when, because I think it is so obvious. The next tier of difficulty in discussing this would be a character like Tracer, who, while in the backline, has a lot more difficult decisions to make. I think Winston's target prioritization is much easier. And this is going to be evidenced by a clip that we're going to break down that I think tells this entire story, all things considered. Early pickoff, man advantage, lose the fight, Winston fighting the wrong thing. We survey the landscape, get some early chip damage down, and between some good focus fire and a Discord prioritization on the monkey, he goes down. Somehow our Zarya dies to a McCree, but we trade that out, still at a man advantage now. Genji dives our backline, got Discord on him, I hit a shot, get him down to half HP, but somehow our Winston dies on the front line. He's battling Lucio in tanks and ends up losing to the Orisa, and our Genji feasts, picking up our Zenyatta, our soldier, and before you know it, a fight that we should have won, as we quickly kept man advantage, but because we didn't kill the right things, we instantly lost it. Now, there was a lot going on through this entire clip, so we are going to watch it again, and then move on to further clips that can help explain this from the Winston's perspective, from my own Winston gameplay, of how to make sure you don't let this happen to your team. First and foremost, on the break of the fight here, you'll notice that our Winston is way in front of everybody else. Why? Well, we don't have a Lucio on King of the Hill. That's going to be a major contributing factor to this disorganized play. Our Winston dives onto the point, rushing onto the objective, which hasn't even unlocked yet, by the way. Their Winston does the same thing, and we focus him. Really, both Winstons are playing fairly badly here. Our Winston just got away with it, and their Winston got focused. Now, all the while, if we look up at the kill feed, we can figure out what our Winston was doing. He focuses down on Lucio. On paper, you might say, kill their healers, that's the way to victory. That's Winston's job, right? Well, not exactly. The enemy team tries to flank onto our side of the map, and we do deal with it against the McCree. I get a shot onto the enemy Genji, and he goes down to half health. Uses his reflect, and with that opening, it should be time for the Winston to dive back into our line to make sure that our healers don't die, because if that happens, we instantly win this point. We have the man advantage. There's nothing that the enemy Orisa could do in that situation, but because the threat assessment was so incorrect, our Winston was fighting the enemy Orisa, who eventually got to be on fire somehow, I assume by pelting into the Winston's massive hitbox, and because our Winston didn't prioritize the Genji, who in my opinion is his hard and fast, 100% of the time, one-on-one assignment. If there was a Genji on the map and you're playing Winston, there's very few times you should be fighting anything else, especially if he's fighting your backline. Coming up to this next fight, instead, I take matters in my own hands and duel the Genji myself as Widowmaker, a duel I should really never win. Kinda get lucky, and we can see easily what happens when our backline is secure against the dive threat. Now, I've watched this round a few times. Our Winston does kill the Genji once, but other than that, it almost looks like he's never fighting him. And what this brings up is a core lesson of Overwatch, as well as Winston play in specific, but something that I think over time, as the community develops a stronger understanding of the game, that will understand much more clearly. You cannot play the game in expectation that you should just have your individual impact on the match, because so much of the design of the game of Overwatch is built in such a way for you to be able to enforce and protect your team, and what goes along with that is that the enemy is going to have threats that, if go ignored, will carry the entire fight. It doesn't matter if you have a man advantage, if your target prioritization is poor and you allow the enemy to take their favorable duels, as in a Genji on your healers, while you take unfavorable duels, as in a Winston on enemy tanks, with a time to kill that lasts about as long as the entirety of the Lord of the Rings franchise, you're gonna have a hard time. Now, we've said this video is about target prioritization, but really, the only thing we've described thus far is assignments, which is a different thing altogether. Target prioritization instead is actually the next step beyond that. You can understand, yes, Genji's my main assignment as Winston almost all the time. That one's easy. What's more difficult is the actual process of prioritizing targets in the middle of combat. That's where things get a little bit more tricky. That's where decisions have to be made. It's nice we can make these really simple, concrete examples, like if the enemy has a Genji, fend him off as Winston non-stop, because it's wrong to have to expect your teammates to be able to deal with one of the scariest flankers in the entire game. The next step of this is knowing when to change targets. There's almost a flow chart of logic through this. While playing Winston, are you battling a tank? Yes or no? If yes, should you be? Are there DPS threats abound that you should be dueling instead because fighting tanks is bad? Except, of course, if you're in a cleanup situation. If there's nothing else to fight, of course, fight the tanks. But if not, you should constantly be looking and changing your targeting to try to find the best target, because the game of Overwatch has a lot of sustain, a lot of abilities to heal, evade, etc., which makes this entire process a big section of being good at the game. Now let's go back to Ilios Ruins to look at another engagement that pans out quite a bit differently than the one that we saw when I was on Widowmaker. Here, we actually have single healer Lucio. Not really that great, but 2 tanks, 3 DPS, 1 healer. I'm not going to get pocket healed, so there's absolutely no reason for me to immediately dive into the enemy team. Our friendly Tracer, though, has a different plan altogether and does go in and die immediately. But, spoiler alert, we are going to win this fight, even though we're a man down right now. In order to stop the enemy Genji from just doing what he wants on the field, I isolate him in specific. He does have to run away to go get health, but I do as well. A little bit of an unfortunate timing here occurs, where my jump was to get back to the point as fast as possible, but because the Genji dives my Widowmaker, I'm not available to help her out, or at the very least trade out that kill. This goes to show you the massive importance of not tunnel visioning on the objective when it doesn't work. A map that's wide open like Ruins, with an objective that's on the low ground, means that it's pretty darn difficult to just put all your bodies on the point, hold it, without losing the team fight. The structure of this map necessitates that you win the team fight to control the map and put minimal bodies on point in order to capture it, because otherwise, you're essentially giving the enemy team a shooting gallery to shoot down into, which is exactly what this enemy team does. Because they think they have the objective, by pure man advantage alone, they sort of meat shield onto the point, we have a crossfire this time, and we clean up these kills ourselves. The only thing that I wish I could have changed about this entire fight was saving my Widowmaker's life. If that was the case, we would have won even easier than we already did. Which, of course, wouldn't be done by me as Winston being overly aggressive into the enemy team's tanks, but instead doing a better job of isolating my assignment, which realistically is the only major threat to our Widow from range, and if we did that, the Widow's line of sight would have cleaned up anyway. Luckily, we win the fight regardless, though. Now here's a slightly different example of target prioritization. Last point on Ilios, the enemy starts to set up, but we actually take all of the relevant ground. We quickly create a concave that stops the enemy from being able to get to the point. The enemy soldier gets run away and can't really do much from way back at the other side of the map. Now granted, we do lose our Genji fairly early in this point, but because I fended off the soldier from the high ground, then went to the point ourselves, we're able to just brawl it out on point, the enemy forcing to have to fight into us. And between my massive cleave damage and target prioritization and our Lucio's boops, we prioritize the better ground and the better engagement over simply trying to fight into the enemy's formation themselves. We had the objective, they're the ones that had to take into it, so the phrase fighting on point oftentimes can be a relevant strategy as well. The contrast between the map geometry of these 2 points couldn't be more diverse. On Ruins, there's massive sight lines and objective on the low ground, meaning that the win condition is keeping your ranged DPS alive to shoot down into it. If of course you're running them. This all changes if you decided to make a comp that fights on the point, which works a little different. On the flip side, when the King of the Hill objective is basically inside a secured room, where we're safe from a lot of the outside damage, and as long as me as Winston prioritize getting the soldier off the high ground, not necessarily going to just kill him, but fending him off, that means the enemy is forced to have to take a very slow engagement into us in close range, and if they don't commit fully and quickly into that, it can spell doom. Really, the funny thing is, them having a soldier and a Genji wasn't too good against my Winston pick here. The Roadhog had to clean me up, he didn't hit the hook. That made things easier for me, and guess which hero would have been better to fight into this lighthouse? Reaper. Ha! I've met my mentioned Reaper in a video quota for today, making sure that I keep the enemy team's DPS at bay and also on edge. Every single time they start to either poke their way out into a relevant position, I'm there to pounce them. Well, it means that we control the entire pace of the battle. It's this reason why I say Reaper has any spot in the middle at all, because he's one of the few characters that actually can just square up against the Winston and be happy about it. Yes, Roadhog can do that as well, but we see how that worked out for this enemy Roadhog. Between good bubble placement and better movement, Roadhog's not shifty enough really, and he's all in on that one hook, whereas a Reaper would be able to dive in on the objective, brawl on the point, and severely punish the Winston play. So, with the examples that we've explained thus far, I want to try to create this equation that I mentioned at the start of the video. What are the different pieces that we have to put together in order to try to dissect how an engagement should go? Where is your objective? How do you plan to engage? When the objective's on the low ground like Ruins, it's all about the range combat. If the objective is inside, you can choose to fight outside if it's favorable. If the enemy team's soldier on the high ground decided to fight me instead of running away, well, great, I win then. Or if the enemy soldier runs away into the safety of irrelevant ground away from the objective, fine. That means you've won the footsie duel at that point, and you get to just take your prize on the objective itself and force them to fight into you. We're talking a lot about engagements here because engagements are so crucial to how Overwatch plays, and are going to mold what is the most important thing for you to be targeting at what time. Because if you just tunnel vision in on dueling stuff all the time, the enemy has the opportunity to bait you into a fight you don't want to be in. What's important above all of this is to remember to keep better positioning in pertains to your win condition. Don't overly face into the enemy with a chance to die, especially if you have to babysit your ranged DPS. Also, don't over-engage into bad positioning. If the enemy has ground that isn't going to get them anywhere, let them have it and hold the ground that matters. Then, when the fight breaks out in that situation, then you want to be flowing through your most important targets to make sure that they get focused first. Don't fight tanks too long, and in general, this goes for just about every character in the entire game. Focus squishies. They have smaller health packs and bigger impact than tanks do, whereas tanks are built to take a beating. Unless of course you're like Bastion, Junkrat, Reaper, you're probably not going to have enough damage to be able to burst through them unless your entire team is focusing them. If we're talking about straight up 1v1 battles, it's best to constantly be looking for the squishies to be able to kill them quickly. They have a smaller health pool, and once they're gone, the enemy's tanks can just kind of get danced around. Because tanks by themselves, without something to support, actually aren't that scary at all. The debate in all of this is when is it okay to utilize resources and potentially lives in order to focus the enemy team's backline in exchange for potentially losing your own DPS or healers. Most of the time, it's better to sort of be feeling out these situations moment to moment. Winston is the best example for this because he jumps in and out of combat so frequently that you have the ability to be anywhere every 6 seconds, which is definitely something that you should think about doing. You have the opportunity to constantly reevaluate if you're having the best impact you can from moment to moment. And because of this, even if you do get kills They could be the wrong kills, and they could be kills that cost your team so much time that allowed for enemy team threats to have an even easier time killing your team, as evidenced by my Widowmaker clip where my Winston fights enemy team's tanks instead of helping us fight the Genji. I mean, we get the Genji down to half twice, both when I'm Widowmaker and Reaper at the end. If in either situation, Winston utilized his massive leap ability to track down the Genji to either hit him with a small bit of Tesla fire or a jump pack, that Genji's dead, and then all of a sudden, we don't have to be dancing around in our own backline struggling to survive. We can be focusing that Orisa who was just gonna die for free, with the combined focus fire effort of the rest of our team. Sometimes when your teammates are dying, and you feel like you're playing well, you have to take a step back, especially if you're playing Winston, Tracer, Genji, characters that are very good at getting places and keeping themselves alive. Well, what's going wrong that's stopping your teammates from getting into the fight with you? It may be required that you go win a duel that protects them, then you snowball the fight from there. A lot of people ask me what a snowball is. Well, that's when you have an advantage and then you very quickly build it, like a snowball rolling down a hill. It gains more snow as it goes and gets bigger and bigger, and then you win. And the aspects of Overwatch that create that snowball to occur are your win condition. Finding that win condition. Is it picking off a key DPS? Is it stopping the enemy team's ult? There's numerous examples we could go through, but it was important that I made this video first that sort of set the template of how we can discuss these problems to begin with. Because even describing what we're even talking about was so elaborate and difficult, as you've noticed throughout the duration of this video. In future videos on this subject, we can get more specific on different types of engagements, especially when it comes down to ultimate economy. Because if Lucio or Mercy has their ult, it almost doesn't matter what lethal ults you have, they all of a sudden become as big of a threat as that Genji was to our backline. But we'll cross those bridges when we come to it. This video could be an hour long, but instead, we'll end it here. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. If you found it useful, please let me know in the comment section down below. A lot of meticulous work went into this one, so don't be shy with giving positive support. It really does mean a lot to us. Hearing from those of you who are fans of the channel and enjoy the content, it really motivates us to keep going. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe because we upload each and every day, so you're going to want to hit the bell icon so you get notified when our videos go live. Linked in the description to check out our Discord server, where you can find teammates to pair up with, and also our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been FREEDO for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.